Today, I'm very honored to be joined by former governor and ambassador to Singapore and China, Jon Huntsman. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Heather. What a treat to be with you.
Well, I'm very excited about this one because one thing that I haven't tackled yet on the show is trade. And I know a lot of people go, oh my God, trade.
I see. Glaze right over.
Exactly.
Heaven forbid.
Right. But I want to let's go back to I'm 5 years old and I have a green marble and you have some licorice and I want that licorice. So you say, ooh, give me the green marble and I'll give you the licorice. That would be trade, right?
That would be trade. And then you establish a market value for the product you're trying to sell, right?
Right.
And then you, in your home, say we're next door neighbors, there may be some barriers to getting my product to you. You might have locked doors. You might have people standing in the way. You might have a dog outside that's scaring me off. Those are called trade barriers. They're called market access barriers. And our trading relationships are not too dissimilar from that, whether it's trade with China, whether Canada, Mexico, whether the European Union. You never have fair and free trade. There are always barriers of some kind, dogs out in the yard, locked doors, whatever, that stand in the way of my delivering the product to you in exchange for whatever you're giving to me.
Okay. So I know you just said like free trade.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between free trade and paying for trade? I don't know, what does that mean, free trade?
Well, free trade is a concept that generally people try to aspire to. We've never really technically reached it, although barriers have become quite low in terms of a tariff, a tax that you might pay when you cross a national boundary or border. So free trade in a perfect world is there are no boundaries or barriers that stand in the way. I've got something. I bake a pie. I'm delivering it to your home. There are no dogs in the yard. There are no locked doors, and you're buying it from me for a free or at least from a fair market value. And I might be buying something from your home.
Okay, so let's translate that a little bit into a bigger market. If I'm a company or a country in this case, what are some of the barriers that if I want to send my product to China, let's just use China because you've been over there a lot. What are some of the barriers I would have to sending my product to China and getting something back from them?
Well, there are barriers in any trading relationship, whether it's a big, complicated one like between the United States and China, or even just cross boundaries, like into Canada, for example. Even though we have a U.S.-Canada free trade agreement, they call them FTAs, a free trade agreement, and we have several FTAs with different countries of the world. And that basically is a guarantee by both sides that you'll take trade barriers and eliminate them to where you're almost effectively trading in a free trade a barrier-free environment. So in the case of China, where we don't have a whole lot of trade agreements, we've heard, for example, President-elect Trump and others say that we've got to renegotiate trade deals with China or do this and that. The fact of the matter is we really don't have any trade agreements with China, and that's the big problem. There's nothing that governs the trade between both countries that works to take down the barriers that stand in the way. So if I'm making a product here, so let's just say I was just playing basketball with my daughter yesterday, and so we're making basketballs here, and they're good quality basketballs, and basketballs taking off in China, so they might not make the right kinds of basketballs, and they love U.S. products, so U.S. made basketballs are great. And we manufacture it here, and for everything starts with barriers at the localist levels. You're taxed here on your business, and then you have to put that good on a truck and distribute it to a port. And oftentimes there are hidden tariffs or taxes as you go from one step to the other. And then you have to transport it all the way across the Pacific Ocean to a port in China. Whereupon you're going to have paperwork galore. You're going to pay an import fee or a tax. You're going to have to distribute it to a warehouse. You may have a warehouse tax at that point. You then have to get it into the retail store or whatever that outlet is for purposes of distribution to the consumer. And then you're taxed again at that level. Now, beyond all the taxes step by step, there may be a quota in terms of the number of basketballs that the country will allow imported in.
Okay.
And this isn't even taking into account what we would call corruption, where you've got people on the take every step of the way asking for a little bit of a handout as your good. As your good, in this case, a basketball, moves from the point of manufacturing out of our country into the market in which you're trying to sell it.
Okay, so let me just put this a little bit into monetary terms. So let's say it costs me $10 just to make the basketball.
Right.
But then, that tax to ship it out or the shipping tax is $2. And then in the port in the US, they charge me another $2. Then once I get into China, it's $1, and then another couple of dollars to get it into stores like you talked about. So by the time all is said and done, I've lost all of my $10, plus I may owe some, which is why the cost of the basketball for somebody to buy it is now $50 or $75 for the basketball, so that I can recoup or I can make more money than it cost me for this basketball.
That's right.
So what are the problems in China getting great, they want the basketballs, but what do we get? What do I get in return for sending my basketballs over to China?
Well, presumably you're making a product that people want and they're willing to pay for. And that's why taking these barriers out of the way of trade is it frees up a lot more in the way of profitability and therefore job creation, and it levels the playing field. So you're manufacturing in one country, exporting to another, and you can free up a global marketplace that today is hard to imagine because there's so many barriers that stand in the way in virtually every market of the world. But it is a profit to you. You've got to be able to make something that others want. So in the case of China, where you have 1.4 billion people, you've got a lot of consumers. Presumably a lot of demand for a new sport like basketball, which is growing very, very quickly. The problem will be you'll make all the basketballs you possibly can. You'll export all of them and probably make a pretty good profit, even with all of the barriers that stand in the way. But then someone in China is going to want to go into competition against you and make something locally. And oftentimes, and this is another type of trade barrier that a lot of people don't realize, governments will impose quotas or non-tariff barriers against products coming in to protect a local manufacturing source. So let's say that I'm in China then, and I have good ties with the government, and I say, I don't like that manufacturer in Orem, Utah, who's sending us all these I want to make them locally, and I want to derive my own profit here, and I want you to protect the marketplace for me and my basketballs right here. And by the way, if you do that, you're going to make a lot more in the way of taxes off my local business than you will off somebody over in the United States. So that then is another form of a trade barrier. Sometimes they call them quotas. It's just another form of protectionism, and so trade becomes very, very complicated at a certain level, and there are lots of distortions along the way that make for great difficulty, and that's why it's become such a huge issue in this presidential campaign.
Okay. Well, I read in doing research for the show, back in 1978, China only exported like $150 million worth of product, I believe. But now we're in the billions and billions of dollars of products that come out of China, not just to the U.S., but globally, worldwide. So what happened to China's economy that they've been able to grow? I mean, that's a pretty staggering growth rate.
So if you go back to the origins of our trade with China, so you have to go all the way back almost to the founding of our country. This, 1780s, early 1780s, the Empress of China ship sailed from New York City, and it actually before that went in and out of Philadelphia. And Benjamin Franklin was one of the first advocates of trade with China. And the ship sailed to the Pearl River Delta, which is in the southern part of China, where a lot of the consumers were. And so our trade, goes all the way back really to the founding of our country. We then didn't do a lot of trade in the last century because of wars and revolutions and ideological differences. We started again in 1971. By the end of the Reagan administration, 1988, roughly 25% of all China's exports came here to the United States, and that number was about $10 billion. Today, the U.S.-China relationship is about, well, it's now over $500 billion in two-way trade. They export more to us because we buy a lot of product from a lot of countries of the world, but particularly China, than they buy from us. So we have a trade imbalance right now. We need to export more into China, which is another problem we won't get into right now.
Right.
So it's soon to be the biggest trading relationship the world has ever seen. Right now, the U.S. and Canada have the largest trading relationship between two countries, and that's soon to be eclipsed by China, by the U.S.-China trading relationship.